Back in January of this year, fans were very disappointed to learn that EA's open-world Star Wars game, codenamed Orca, had become the very latest in the franchise to go the way of the dodo. That said, disappointed is not synonymous with surprised. Unfortunately, the rapid turnover of interesting Star Wars video game concepts far outstrips the rate at which they're actually developed and released, meaning there have been cancellations going as far back as Return of the Jedi Ewok Adventure for the Atari 2600, although that one was probably for the best. Some got no further than the desk of a concept artist, while others seemed all but ready for release. And today we're going to have a little look at a few of the most interesting. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and in no particular order, here are 10 cancelled Star Wars games you'll never get to play. Number 10. Ragtag. Seems a good place to start, given the aforementioned open-world Star Wars game lifted a number of concepts from the previously cancelled title known by the codename Ragtag. This is one of the more tragic casualties of recent years, and you need only look as far as the game's other monikers. Also referred to as the Visceral Star Wars game and the Amy Hennig Star Wars game, this project was shaping up to be the incredibly appetizing prospect of an uncharted narrative with a Dead Space frontage, all set in the galaxy far, far away. Taking place between episodes 4 and 5, the player would assume the role of a charming, Solo-like swashbuckler named Dodger Boone, forced into a life of crime after escaping Imperial conscription. Hailing from Alderaan, Dodger is wanted by the Empire merely for being deemed likely to join the rebellion in response to the destruction of his home planet. The game's linear action-adventure style would have followed Dodger as he and his crew carried out jobs for Jabba the Hutt in order to raise enough bribe money to get corrupt Imperials to remove him from the list of survivors. I'll say it again, essentially what you've got here is Nathan Drake slinking around the grimy Star Wars gangland through what we can safely assume would have been another impeccable Amy Hennig narrative. Sadly, Ragtag went down with the ship when EA mercilessly closed Visceral Games, and while a few concepts were allegedly carried forward to the subsequent open world project, we all know by now how that one ended up too. Number 9. The untitled Chewbacca game. One criticism I could throw at Ragtag is that it wouldn't exactly have been groundbreaking in the Star Wars universe to see a charming human male doing his thing in a seedy part of town.
I don't want to sell you death sticks.
A much less predictable premise, though, was a game pitched in 2003 all about arm-ripping Sasquatch impersonator Chewbacca, not revealed to fans until long after the project itself had been canned. Bridging the narrative gap between the Kashyyyk arc of Episode 3 and the Wookiee's introduction in Episode 4, the unnamed game would have seen Chewie take on the role of a mercenary, perhaps combining something like Star Wars Bounty Hunter with the lovable walking carpets appearances in the Battlefront games. Rather surprisingly though, the final nail in the Wookiee's 8-foot coffin was delivered by none other than George Lucas himself, who, upon reviewing LucasArts in-development projects at the time, decided he wasn't keen on the thought of Chewbacca being front and center. Typical. Always the co-pilot, never the captain. Number 8. Star Wars Imperial Commando. Star Wars Republic Commando for the Xbox and PC was a ruddy, brilliant game. As the leader of Delta Squad, an elite force of clone troopers, the player was put through a wonderfully visceral and gritty campaign against the Confederacy. Thanks to a cleverly integrated HUD and the ability to give orders to your squad, Republic Commando was a much more immersive take on the other non-Jedi Star Wars games, but with all their sense of vulnerability. In 2004, before the first game had even been released in fact, LucasArts started toying with the idea for a Republic Commando follow-up, and according to developer Brett DeVille, I've no idea if I pronounced that correctly, the sequel's subtitle was at one stage a toss-up between Imperial Commando and Rebel Commando. Interestingly, the team actually favoured the former idea and began commissioning concept art for an FPS set sometime after Order 66, where the player strapped on the armour of an early stormtrooper. It's a fascinating era in the Star Wars timeline, partially explored in The Force Unleashed, but wonderful as it was to experience these events through the eyes of an omnipotent space warlock, it would have been perhaps even more interesting to get the perspective of a lowly foot soldier. Number 7, Star Wars Smuggler. Strange one here from around 2006. Also known during development as Star Wars Scum and Villainy, Star Wars Smuggler was a cross-platform trading game in which players assumed the role of, a smuggler and engaged in buying and selling goods across consoles, tablets, and even Facebook. The game would have featured a narrative played out in the original trilogy era, with players rewarded for buying low, selling high, and let's just say, avoiding any Imperial entanglements. Unfortunately, this is another concept for which we never saw any assets or footage, so instead, enjoy this clip of Yariel Poof. Nice. Number 6, Battle of the Sith Lords. What a loss. Under the codename Damage, this game took a number of forms over its development, but importantly, all of them revolved around playing as Darth Maul, and even more importantly, while Star Wars fans are now well aware that Maul's Obi-Wan related accident in The Phantom Menace was not the end for him, this was very much new information at the time the game was pitched. Battle of the Sith Lords began development under Red Fly Studio in 2010, but with a view to create a third-person stealth experience, they ran into a number of issues with the game's narrative. The Clone Wars writers did not want to offer any detail beyond Maul survived in case their plots were leaked. As a result, the story team behind Battle of the Sith Lords basically had no idea what they could and couldn't do with the character. Things then got even worse somehow, and once again it was after a meeting with George Lucas, who suggested that the writers included Star Wars Legends character Darth Talon, who lived nearly 200 years after Maul's time. When Red Fly pointed out this slight age difference, Lucas just said, "Oh, okay, well, maybe we can just make him a Darth Maul clone instead."
Oh, George, stop doing these things, I don't like it.
The project's true death ultimately came as a result of the Disney buyout, but with all this confusion surrounding the narrative, it sounds to me like it was on futile life support long before then. And what a shame. Number 5, Star Wars Attack Squadrons. Do you like Rogue Squadron? Do you like the space segments from the original Battlefront 2? Do you like really bad video game trailers?
Information coming in hot.
Then you will love the post-Disney takeover game, Star Wars Attack Squadrons. This free-to-play dogfighter for the PC was nearing the stages of completion by the time it was canned, and I'll be honest, this is one cancelled game for which I'm not particularly inclined to mourn. The sound design seemed very intrusive and ill thought out, the particle effects and laser bolts looked almost cartoony at times, and the less said about the freemium business model, the better. Number 4, The New Emperor. According to the reference book Rogue Leaders: The Story of LucasArts, a video game was in development in 1998, depicting a post-Episode 6 world where rumors of a new emperor prompted the rebels to assign a dangerous espionage mission to C-3PO. A dangerous espionage mission to C3.
The game was cancelled.
Number 3, Star Wars Dark Squadron. In the exceptional Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader, 2 of the 5 unlockable levels allowed the player to jump into Darth Vader's TIE Advanced and change the course of history by taking out Luke Skywalker and the other rebel pilots during the attack on the first Death Star and eliminating all the fleeing transports at the evacuation of Yavin 4. For a time, LucasArts strongly considered expanding these ideas into a whole new Rogue Squadron game played from the point of view of an Imperial pilot, much like the notion of the Republic Commando Stormtrooper sequel. Admittedly, similar ideas had already been explored in 1994's Star Wars TIE Fighter, but it would have been a real treat at the time to engage in this sort of Imperial space combat in the style of the hit Rogue Squadron series. Interestingly though, the main reason this concept never made it to the developers' workstations was because it was shoved to one side by an idea the team had more interest in pursuing, a ground-level shooter game starring Chewbacca. You know, the one that was also cancelled. Number 2, Star Wars 1313. This is up there as one of the most lamentable Star Wars video game cancellations in history, not least because we were treated to this tantalizing gameplay in 2013. I mean, sure, Ragtag sounded fantastic, but we saw very little in the way of actual assets. 1313's reveal and subsequent cancellation, on the other hand, was like dangling a Cumberland sausage in front of your dog and then chucking it in the bin. The dog, I mean. The game promised a story set in Coruscant's dark underbelly. One particularly exciting thing was that it was allegedly going to be rated M for mature, allowing a very welcome deviation from the family-friendly content we've come to expect from the franchise. At least, since Disney bought it anyway. Best of all was that this fleeting gameplay segment was, I think, reminiscent of Naughty Dog's big hitters of the past 10 years. I hate to use the comparison a second time in one video, but between the cover and shoot gameplay, the intriguing character relationships, and the traversal segments across, oh look, a large vehicle that's falling apart in my hands, this was shaping up to be Uncharted Wars on Coruscant in a hole full of criminals. I wanted it was cancelled, I cried. And number 1, Star Wars Battlefront 3 and 4. The campaign mode of the original Battlefront 2, which followed the 501st Legion of Clones, was a lot of fun in and of itself, but fans patiently awaited a sequel for many years, hoping for a much deeper level of characterization and narrative. Enter Star Wars Battlefront 3, which though never released, was clearly nearing completion if the reams and reams of leaked gameplay and cutscenes are to be believed. The story mode was to follow a pair of specially bred clones known as X1 and X2, depicting their exploits across the Clone War battlefields. But rather bizarrely, in 2018, a collection of concept art surfaced online that had allegedly been commissioned for a Star Wars Battlefront 4. Strange though it was to think this project had ever even been considered, the art itself was absolutely fascinating. Artists had apparently been asked to design alternate versions of classic Star Wars heroes and villains, and they had thought of everything. Jedi Leia kitted out with robes and a lightsaber, a fleshy General Grievous before his cyborg days, light side versions of Maul, Dooku, and a redeemed Vader who made it off the Death Star alive, monster Chewbacca who'll rip off both your arms and then your head, and a bunch of Jedi who have fallen to the dark side, including Luke, Mace Windu, and a whole host of Kenobis, McGregors, and Guinnesses alike. This is completely ridiculous. It's just bizarre, and I absolutely need it in my life. That means you, Disney.
Not until you pay for the last one.
And that's our list, but let us know in the comments below if we missed anything out. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and if you want to support the things you enjoy, then check out the rewards on our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.